Hey folks, this week we're talking about resignations from the kernel and GPL court rulings. There's the Mozilla mess and a whole lot more. I promise it's not all bad news though, so you want to stay tuned to the show.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is the Untitled Linux Show, episode 192, recorded Saturday, March the 1st. You shouldn't have to care. Hey folks, it is Saturday, and you of course know what that means. It's time for the Untitled Linux Show. That's where a bunch of us, old, young, gray beard, I've got some gray going on. Anyway, a bunch of us Linux geeks get together. We talk about Linux and open source, the newest things going on, and all kinds of other stuff. We're going to start with some real fun stories this week. It is, of course, the regular crew today. We've got Rob and Ken and Jeff. I appreciate all of you guys being here. Looking forward to having a good time, a lot of fun. We've already had a lot of fun. Those that join us live in the Discord know. But we have a lot of stuff to cover today. A lot of stuff has been going on this week.
The rest of you have missed it.
All right. So Rob is going to lead us off, and we are still talking about Rust in the kernel. And,
I know.
We talked about a lot of this last week, but there's been an update, a follow-on repercussion, maybe? What's new, Rob?
Yeah, and I know I said last week that I wasn't going to talk about Rust in the kernel drama anymore, but it just keeps going and going. It's like the Energizer Bunny. But this energy is far less positive. So yeah, last week we talked about Christoph Harwigs. I might have called him Christopher, but it's Christoph, I think. Hellwigs. I said his last name wrong this time. So last week we talked about Christoph Hellwigs' discontent with Rust being in the kernel. You know, how he objected to Rust code commits that didn't even touch the part of the kernel he was maintaining, essentially at least. He was objecting as a user of the code rather than a maintainer, and Linus had some things to say about that, which we talked about last week. So go check that out if you missed that, Ken. Now this week he has decided to make himself only a user of the DMA mapping part of the kernel code, as he made a commit this week to the code, removing himself as a DMA mapping maintainer. Fortunately, he wasn't the only maintainer of this part of the code. He was a co-maintainer. Marek Skifrowski is still listed as a maintainer. And Hellwig's commit noted that Marek has graciously offered to maintain the DMA mapping tree. Some of the comments I see on this says Marek's pretty busy with other things, so kind of hoping he could keep up with this. Hopefully someone else will join along. But along with this commit, Linus Torvald has also signed off. So it's a done deal at this time. Mm-hmm. For now, Hellwig will continue to be co-maintainer or maintainer for the NVMe driver, NVMe target driver, personality handling, and free VXFS file system areas of the kernel. So he's not going away. I'm not sure why he left that part, and he's still sticking with these other things for now. But in the story from Phoronix, there are a lot of interesting comments.
You read the comments on a Phoronix article.
I read the comments.
Very brave man.
Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. I don't know what the criteria is. It depends how clicky of a mood I'm in, I guess. I don't know. But it started out right at the top with a lot of hate and concern. People saying killing the Linux kernel, calling Rust a meme language. Yet others came along after that to discuss that Rust is just kind of the obvious conclusion to the Linux kernel, and saying a lot of positive things. But wow, I couldn't believe right from the go, one after the other against Rust. One interesting stat that someone shared is, and I didn't confirm the stat, this is just what somebody said, maybe it's wrong, but he says that Rust is less than 0.12% of the kernel code, and yet there is more than double as many Python files in the source tree, and nobody's complaining about that. Now he does use two different metrics there. He says how much of the kernel code and then how many Python files. I believe he's trying to imply that there's still a lot more Python, and nobody's complaining about that. Is that because Python's so much easier than Rust? I don't know. Then another Phoronix article goes on to talk about completely unrelated except for the Rust, and it talks about the zlib-rs, which is the Rust version of the C-based zlib. The zlib-rs is already outperforming the C-based zlib. And, that's just an excellent example of the benefits of Rust. And, as I don't know if it's developers are able to focus on performance when they don't have to worry about those, edge cases that, was it Linus, or maybe it was Greg KH that talked about these edge. I think it was Greg talked about these edge cases in C that people have to debug when, if they're using Rust, they just don't exist. So you can focus on other parts of the code. I don't know if that's what makes it more performant, if there's something actually about Rust that's more performant. I've never really heard anyone say the benefit of Rust being performance, but zlib-rs right here is an example, at least, of a Rust version of something outperforming a C-base that's been around for years and has had a lot of time to optimize. But hoping after this, this whole the final, hopefully final hellwig resignation from this part of maintaining the kernel. Hopefully, we could just get back to work and the business of moving forward with the kernel. Hopefully, this doesn't slow anything down. But there's always arguments going on somewhere, just not as newsworthy as this one.
Yeah. So I think Hellwig probably did the right thing here, and I would say probably good for him for realizing what needed to be done and doing it. I don't think this is quite the case of someone taking their toys and leaving. We did see someone do that in kernel development in the past couple of weeks. But just from the outside, from my perspective, I have a lot more respect for what Hellwig did here. He's not a huge fan of what's going on. He doesn't feel like, I guess, in good conscience that he can do it. So rather than cause problems, he just said, all right, I'll let somebody else take care of it. So
yeah,
cool.
Are you saying he became a sacrificial lamb?
No, I don't think so. That would be more like if Torvalds came to him and said, "You're going to step down from the kernel. I expect your resignation letter in the next 24 hours." That would be more sacrificial lamb. I don't think that's what happened.
We don't know that, but he's still maintaining other parts of it, so that's probably
right. Right. It does not seem from the outside that that's what happened.
I'm interested in one of the parts he's maintaining, that personality handling subsystem.
Yeah. I don't know much about that.
Are you hoping to improve your personality, Ken?
Well, if that system works for me, why not?
I did not look into what that is. That did catch my eye, but I didn't have time to. What is personality? I don't know. Part of the kernel.
I don't know much about that. No. Derecho makes an interesting point in the comments, and I will hit this before we move on. He says, I will point out that while I'm a safer language and tooling proponent, Rust has its own edge cases, and it won't stop people from making fundamental programming logic mistakes. And that's absolutely true. You're never going to be able to have a language that actually does something useful that is also completely safe. It's just not possible, particularly when you're talking about in the kernel space. It is literally impossible for your language to be completely, even just memory safe, and do useful things with hardware, because dealing with hardware is not a memory safe thing. It's just not. So, Rust is not it is not the magic bullet. It should help things, but it is not the magic bullet to get rid of problems in the kernel.
The only way you can make it completely safe is basically take away all its power, and all it's going to do is be able to echo "Hello World."
I don't even think you can do that. Actually, you have to be able to write. You have to write to memory addresses that are technically that's not memory. To do anything with a computer, you have to write to memory addresses where there's no actual memory backing it. It's not your normal memory because of DMA and the way shared memory
It could be a
works.
higher level, and all it's doing is actually running Echo.
Sure, you just reinvented BASIC. All right.
Or Pilot.
Or plenty of things. Okay,
BASIC's not safe either, but go on.
I think he's trying to say it's time to move on to taking away the license.
Yes. So Ken, I saw this story. I have a take on it, but you picked it. And so give us the rundown on what the Register says is going on with GPL.
Well, we can thank Thomas Claiborne, who wrote this for the Register. He wrote about the defense of FOSS licensing resting on the shoulders of a guy in Virginia. This guy's name is John Mark, and I apologize if I mispronounced the last name. I'm pronouncing it Suhai. He's the founder and CTO of PureThink and iGov. Now, PureThink and iGov are currently in a legal battle with Neo4j. The legal battle has moved to the United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit, which will consider an effort to reverse a California federal district court's decision in the Neo4j versus PureThink. The California federal district court endorsed Neo4j's right to amend the GNU-Affero General Public License version 3, which is governing the use of its software with new binding terms. The outcome of this battle will impact the enforceability of copyleft licenses. Neo4j provided database software under the AGPL version 3, then tweaked the license after 3 companies, they were the Graph Foundation, PureThink, and iGov, had started developing and distributing Open Native Graph Database, or ONGDB, which was a fork of Neo4j's database software. According to Thomas, AGPL version 3 includes language that says any added restrictions or requirements are removable, meaning someone could just file off Neo4j's changes to the usage and distribution license, reverting it to the standard AGPL version 3. Suhai said, I don't think the community realizes that if the Ninth Circuit upholds the lower court's ruling, it won't just kill GPL v3. It will create a dangerous legal precedent that could be used to undermine all open source licenses, allowing licensors to impose unexpected restrictions and fundamentally eroding the trust that makes open source possible. Now, in January, the Software Freedom Conservancy submitted an amicus brief to the Ninth Circuit. The group said, the lower court's interpretation, if upheld on appeal, could radically alter the community's understanding of whether and how further restrictions may be added and removed. If you want more background details on this legal battle, then read Thomas's article, as well as the articles he linked to within his article.
Mm-hmm. So I am convinced that this is not going to kill the GPL v3. I think that is an exaggeration of what's going on here. So to be clear, what has happened is a company wrote software, released it as open source using the AGPL, and the company that holds the copyright then added an additional term to the use of that source code. So they added an additional restriction on it. And the AGPL says, and some of the other GPL licenses, they will say things like, you cannot add additional restrictions on the use of this software. Or if there are additional restrictions, you can ignore them. And so that is what is in question here. Is it legitimate for a license to say that you can strike off additional restrictions? And it does have repercussions. I think it has repercussions for Red Hat and IBM, honestly, because Red Hat releases a lot of code with the additional restriction that someone has to be a paying customer, right, to be able to get to source code, and that if you share that source code, you will ask to not be a paying customer customer anymore, which always struck me as being an additional restriction that probably should be in violation of the GPL. But all that aside, this is very fascinating, and it always is a little nerve-wracking when the GPL or one of these other licenses get tested in court. But I don't think this one is going to be the worst-case scenario that people seem to think it is.
Is that
Rob?
The Red Hat thing? I mean, are they really adding an additional restriction just because the licenses apply to users of the software, and because they kind of paywall that software, it just limits who their users are that are allowed to have that access?
And that's the argument they would make. I look at it and think it's an additional restriction. Other people don't. It would have to be settled in court, and nobody wants to fight that court case right now. Jeff?
Well, are we sure that it's not because the article talks about the Free Software Foundation not jumping in, but are we sure that that's not a plan of if the case doesn't go their way, then they can just appeal it to the Supreme Court and not have to spend so much? Or, I wonder if there's some other legal maneuvering they're thinking ahead on of, we're just going to let it sort itself out. And if things go sideways, then here's our major move we're going to do.
Yeah, it's very possible. I would sort of be surprised to see this go all the way to the Supreme Court. Usually in the United States, when things go to the Supreme Court, it's either where you have a ruling that's like so members of the Supreme Court consider to be so egregious that they feel they have to step in, or you've got different federal court circuits that have contradictory rulings. And that's one of the big ones where the Supreme Court will step in. You've got this circuit that says one thing, and this other circuit looked at the same question and came to a different conclusion. Then the higher court has to step in. But if it's just one ruling, they oftentimes will just let it stand unless they consider it to be particularly egregious. This is not the sort of thing that the Supreme Court usually jumps in on.
So,
yes.
With this case here, just to sum it up, is the thought that they're thinking that in the future, they're not, companies or whatever is not going to be able to add the extra restrictions? Or is the thought that licenses like the GPL are not going to be able to say you can't add restrictions?
Well, that's what the court case is there to decide. I believe what the idea that it would kill the GNU, the GPL, I think what they're warning about is that a part of the GPL license would be considered not inadmissible. That's not the right term.
Invalid.
Yeah, it would be considered a small part of it would be considered invalid. Right. So I think that's the danger there.
So the fear when they say it's going to invalidate the GPL license or whatever, it's that one part. Their fear is that it's not going to allow the GPL to say that you cannot put other restrictions on top of this.
Right.
That's what.
And I think this is it would be a bad thing for one particular reason, and that is when you go to a repository and you see that something has the GPL license or the AGPL license or even the MIT license, whatever. Just by looking at what license it is, you understand very quickly what you are and are not allowed to do. But if we then move into a world where someone can say, this is GPL license, and oh yeah, by the way, here's all the little, underlying fine print that you also have to obey.
Yeah,
like that's not good. That's not good.
There is also an update on the article as of yesterday where the Register included that they understand that the FSF is now planning to file an amicus brief shortly. Oh, and Roger, I want to thank you. Was mispronouncing it. It should be Sui.
There you go.
Sui.
Okay.
Just to be clear, the only reason I brought up the Supreme Court is because it was mentioned in the article. They talked about it.
Indeed. Yeah. I'm just from watching the Supreme Court over the years. I really don't think that this is the sort of thing that they would at this point get involved in.
If they can avoid it.
Yeah, if they can avoid it. Yeah. That's their thing, right? We don't want to. Anyway, so we've talked about two wonderful and uplifting stories so far. Let's make it three. unless you've been hiding under a rock this week, you have probably seen that things are happening at Mozilla. And so in the Mozilla Firefox FAQ, there's this question that's been there for the longest time. Does Firefox sell your personal data? And the answer is nope, never have, never will, and we protect you from many of the advertisers who do. Firefox products are designed to protect your privacy. That's a promise. That has been removed from the FAQ of Firefox. Now, I've been looking in various places around the internet, and I've heard some people talk about this, and I have been told that some of this is because of a service that Firefox offers, OHTTP, which is obfuscated HTTP, which is sort of like a VPN, and they provide it as a service. And so the fact that they provide it as a service, like the way some of these laws are written, it means that they're technically selling your data. And I will say, I've done a little bit of work on another open source project looking at compliance with the GDPR and the California Consumer Privacy Act, the CPA. And I will say that these laws were not written by engineers. They were not written by programmers. And it seems like they were not written by people that understood at all how computers on the internet works. Our specialist that's working with us on this, as we were talking about this, he's like, okay, so you have to, like, every time someone's data gets moved from point A to point B, you have to, specify it here. And he's like, yes, that means when it's getting moved from one place in their computer's RAM to another place in a computer's RAM, technically the way the law is written, you have to spell that out. He's like, no, this was not written by anyone that had a clue. Right. So, okay. So that said, like, I understand that these laws are weird and terribly written. And so some of the changes, I totally believe that is just because of compliance with weird regulations. Like, I buy that. However, Mozilla has not done themselves any favor in their messaging. So let's read their statement. They have a longer statement now about this. It says, Mozilla doesn't sell data about you in the way that most people think about selling data. And we don't buy data about you. Since we strive for transparency and the legal definition of sale of data is extremely broad in some places, we've had to make a step back from making the definitive statements you know and love. We still put a lot of work into making sure that the data we share with our partners, get this. All right, here's the important part of all of this. Here's the important part. We still put a lot of work into making sure that the data we share with our partners, which we need to do to make Firefox commercially viable, is stripped of any identifying information, or is shared in the aggregate, or is put through our privacy-preserving technologies like OHTTP. So they are selling user data. That's the way I read that. Like, they're trying very hard to do it the right way, where they don't give away any identifiable information. Some of this probably also has to do with their agreements with Google, because Google just loves hoovering up data. I know there's also been arguments made that, well, they move your data around because they're a web browser. And so, of course, they do. It's by definition. And I don't know that argument holds water either, particularly in relation to this statement, which basically comes, it's the whole which we need to do to make Firefox commercially viable. Like, that kind of gives away the game. I think the way I read that gives away the game. Yes, they are selling some data. So, yeah, this is an ongoing story. I assume there will be more statements from Mozilla as trying to do damage control. But I'll just say, last week we said, Mozilla, here's what you need to do. Make Firefox great, and don't do anything that's going to make Lunduke write about you. And here we are. On the Lunduke is hilarious. Obviously, I don't agree with all of his takes. Sometimes I think he is more flame baity than he needs to be. But at the same time, I appreciate that he's the one that covers some of these things when nobody else will. But yeah, they failed. They failed at following our instructions. Instructions unclear.
Listen to the show, guys.
Yeah.
Come on. Really, if they're not selling the data, if like some people are saying, they're just, because they're moving it around a certain way, and then they put this blanket statement out, they're not selling it. It's just kind of fits that way. Put a technical description out. I guess you don't have to, call out where the data is going. Just put a description, what kind of data, how it's going, link to it. For those who really care about the technology, can go in like us, read that and say, we've read the tech brief. It's hard to explain, but they're not really selling your data. But yeah, like you said, it sounds like they're selling your data.
That statement in there makes it real hard to understand any other way.
To me, it sounds like they totally
selling it. They're giving it away.
Giving it away
in exchange for money.
Yeah, I think it's probably a lot of X% of our users go to Amazon, X% of our users do this, X%, spend X amount of time on whatever social media site, stuff like that. But
put that in a tech brief.
Yeah. And so like some of this too is just entirely lawyer. Some of the problem here is that you had a statement written by a lawyer, and what a lawyer will write is much different than how we would write it. And someone let that get out to the public without also having an explanation, right? So one of the other new terms of use statements that they made was, when you upload or input information through Firefox, you hereby grant us a non-exclusive, royalty-free worldwide license to use that information to help you navigate, experience, and interact with online content as you indicate with your use of Firefox. And that was another one of the ones that everybody sort of lost their minds over, because it's like, what do you mean I'm giving Firefox a license to use anything that I put into it? And they've come out and said, no. This is literally just the rights you need to operate Firefox, because it does not get, and they added to their statement, to their credit, this does not give Mozilla any ownership in that content, right? So they cleaned that up. It's better. But it's just not great. I'm still not 100% sure whether everything here is just terrible messaging, or if they're actually making changes and they're going to start. And I think this is unfortunately the case, that they're going to start trying to make some money off of users' data. That really sounds like what's happening.
Well, they're talking about trying to put more AI into Firefox, so that would be one place where they're probably using the data, and maybe there's some sales to the AI, hey, okay, you give us access to some of your user data, even though it's anonymized, then now we can feed it for our model, and we can help better we'll give you a discount because you're supplying us with data, and we could, there's a lot of stuff that could be going on in there. But I really do think it's like everything is probably 50-50, right? I mean, half the time it's just, they say things so terribly that it makes it worse than it is, but they're not fully where we want them to be.
Well, if you like the Firefox browser, but you don't want to use it anymore for these reasons, there is, as Derecho points out in the Discord, LibreWolf, which I have done a story on the show before. It's a very lean and security-focused fork of Firefox, essentially, or it's other browser that uses a Firefox engine. So that's an option for you if you don't like it.
Yep. There are.
I have used it.
No, interesting. I've not.
And Mozilla, get a competent lawyer for the next one.
I will say, Mozilla, if you want to tap me for CEO, I can read over these statements. I'll even charge you less than your previous CEOs have. I'll be glad to read over these statements and slap you upside the head and tell you how dumb they are ahead of time. I can do that.
Why pay somebody to do that? Well, they can just let us do like we're doing right now.
It's best not to have these discussions in public. You want to catch dumb stuff before you accidentally go say it in public.
If you want to say
the four of us, they could sponsor the show.
Just buy me enough coffees and I'll read through it for them.
There you go. All right, Jeff, let's talk about curl, Daniel Stenberg, and a whole bunch of C code.
Well, this story is going to continue our series of friction with the Rust language. Now it's not as bad as it sounds. Nobody's in a fight, but in a conference, specifically the FOSDEM, I guess FOSDEM conference, which is an annual open source conference, curl creator Daniel Stenberg promised to show his audience things to do in order to sleep well while having your C code in 20 billion installations. In his talk, Stenberg says he believes 20 billion is actually a low estimate for the number of curl installations in the world, and admittedly, getting an accurate number would be really hard. In his talk, he did say, but of course, we write this in the safest possible language because curl is written in the C programming language. This did draw a nice laugh from the audience, and in his talk, he also continued with a little bit of humor by having a parody of an O'Reilly book. Now, the O'Reilly books, for those that don't know, these are the animal books that a lot of programmers and computer enthusiasts use. The fake book cover said, "Rewriting curl in Rust, a weekend project." and it had a tagline that said, "Telling others instead of doing it yourself." So Stenberg did say, it's a very popular book, but no one has really finished it. Now,
Not even the writer.
Not even the writer. Now, the reason he says all this is, and he's poking fun at Rust, but it applies to any language, is he says curl consists of 180,000 lines of C code, and he does maintain that it's 1.14 times the length of the novel War and Peace. He also said it's actually quite a lot of code for what it is. It transfers data, in case you weren't sure what the curl program actually does. He goes on to say they're not going to rewrite curl in any language, and he did acknowledge that Rust is possibly a great language, and third-party dependencies can still be written in Rust, and he envisions more of that will happen in the future, but curl's current code base is written in C, and he says, we're just patiently iterating and polishing over time. There's not going to be any rewrite. Not only are they sticking to C, but in the curl program, they banned a bunch of undesired functions that are easy to use the wrong way. For example, the getS function, which has been called in other places the devil's tool for creating buffer overflows, as well as scanf, string copy, and sprintf. Stenberg goes on to say, it really doesn't matter how experienced you are. Some functions in the C standard are really not advisable to use in any code, and we check for them with tools. They're banned and checked so they cannot be snuck in even by mistake. Basically saying those functions I listed, if you try to write them into a merged patch or whatever in the C code, it's going to get rejected because it's going to get flagged. Mm-hmm. Now, he does go on to talk about all the different testing they do to make sure there's no memory leaks, no crashes, everything exits cleanly, and the way they do it is they have automated processes to do this. They have a continuous integration test, for example, which ends up running more than 400,000 tests for every pull request and commit. Basically, they're working hard to make sure that there's not any kind of error in curl. He does cover some of the CVEs found in the program, and in 2016, they found 7. 2022 resulted in 2, and in 2024, they found 0. So they're very encouraged by the fact that the number of CVEs they're finding keeps going down. There's a lot more to the article than what I'm covering because I'm just covering a few of the highlights. But the bottom line is they're not rewriting curl in any language because they're at the point where they're just polishing and bug fixing, and any kind of major rewrite in any language, not just Rust, but any language, is going to allow vulnerabilities back into the program. It's felt that a rewrite would not gain any security that they've already built into their process for the program as they have it now. Take a look at the article in the show notes. Like I said, there's a lot more information, quotes, data in there that I didn't cover just for the sake of brevity. So, make sure make sure if you're really pro Rust, you take this very lighthearted manner that Stenberg meant it in. So,
yes. Stenberg is great, by the way. I've interviewed him for Floss Weekly. I think the curl project is a really good example of taking a C project and doing it really well. And where's I going to go with that? You can take the C language, and between a combination of continuous integration tests, debugging, and rules like this, you can make it almost as bulletproof, I think, as something like Rust, because it's the same tools, it's the same techniques. Just one is built into the compiler and the other is built into your CI. So it's it's sort of a blueprint for the rest of the C programs out there. Like if you really want to get it right, but you don't want to go with the Rust, and again, Rust is not a silver bullet. You can have logic errors in your Rust code easy enough.
It's probably even a good blueprint for Python code.
Well, any code. I mean,
Yeah.
because like where they found certain functions that are problem functions, say, okay, we're not going to use this. You've got to use the better, more memory safe functions.
In that
And
case,
there's a lot of
even-
testing that I didn't even go into that they do. I mean, that was just one example of what they're doing for testing. They run a ton of tests on there just to hammer it. Now, I will counterpoint too and say, curl has the luxury. They're not going under major rewrites all the time. They're not, I mean, it's not a program that's making huge evolutionary changes. It's, they're kind of tweaking and adjusting and putting some finer polish on points, but it's not like it's, all right, we've got to really add this wide range of features to it. So it's a little more stable, which helps.
Yeah.
For that matter, even BASIC's not safe. Because with peek and poke, you can do a lot of damage.
Yep, peek and poke. That's arbitrary memory read and write. Goodness, you're there.
These protections for curl probably work for curl. That it's a very basic tool. Does basically one thing. I mean, it's a tool that does.
libcurl gets used in so many different things for doing so many. But it is not just downloading over HTTP.
It transfers. It's not like it's a full GUI application with so many different things going on and so many different features where you can limit the functions you use.
That's what you use Bash for.
Go take a look at the number of protocols that just libcurl supports. It is nuts. Okay. It is not a simple single-use tool. I know it seems like it should be, but
what else does it do besides transferring?
Live streaming.
That's transferring data.
Okay, so all the computers ever do is transfer data, Rob.
Okay, but transferring over a network. I mean, it doesn't have like a GUI with...
Actually, you can use curl to copy a file from one drive to another with a proper syntax.
Yeah, so think about it, though. So curl supports what? HTTP, FTP. I think...
yeah, it supports a lot of protocols, but still
supports a lot of protocols. On top of all those protocols, you've got all of your like SSL layers, the encryption and stuff. So like the number of combinations that curl has to support gets astronomical because of all of these protocols it supports.
Okay, so a web browser also supports pretty much all those things. Plus, it has to do all the formatting and all the other features that comes with the web browser. So my point is, if
we get a replacement for Firefox by using libcurl and building a GUI around it.
You probably could. I don't know how good that would be, but still, I mean, my point is, you probably can't limit all programs. You probably can't block out all programs to these problematic C functions. Otherwise, if you could, I mean, you probably can't block them out and not lose functionality. Otherwise, if you could, why doesn't C just get rid of them if they're not needed?
That is an interesting question.
Probably legacy.
Yes, there's a lot of legacy programs that would break. I will say that if you are writing new C code, you should absolutely follow their rules and do not use, let's see, what's scanf and what are some of the other ones that they mentioned there? Those function calls that they mentioned there. Do not use those because there are such better ones. So those are things like by the way, like it's things like a string copy that the only way that it stops copying is that it hits a null at the end of it, right? So like it has no clue about what the maximum number of bytes are. If that null is not there, it will just continue copying off to infinity if you let it. Whereas the better way to do that is to say, copy until you hit a null, unless you max out at this many bytes, which is the number of bytes in your buffer, and then stop. Like, so it's some really basic safety things that every C program should really be doing. It's just we didn't realize for the first 20, 30 years of writing C code that we were going to have a literal war field in the midst of how programs execute. And so nobody thought about it until 20 years ago.
That legacy reason, though, I don't buy that. I mean, if that's their reason, it's not a good reason, because programming languages drop old functions all the time. I've started with PHP. I've had to upgrade functions from 3 to 5 to 7 because they deprecate things, and it really kind of irked me. It's like, why can't you just make the new function? I mean, be written the same as the old function, just work different underneath. That's the part that always irked me. But the point is, they do that stuff all the time. I've dealt with it often.
So could somebody write that C standard function, rewrite it in Rust to incorporate the changes you made, Jonathan? And then have that be called from within a C application?
You could.
I don't know. You probably could.
You could call it in there, but I mean, part of that is you're kind of some of the older programs would depend on how it actually works, and if you change its functionality, it could break things, and it's they're being extra secure. Maybe the C programming people aren't as concerned about it, and they're kind of, well, it's up to the user. We've got the tools in here. It's up to you to be responsible with them, and it's not our job to hold your hand. I don't know. I'm speculating, but
the one thing, like I said, that I can majorly speak to is PHP, and literally every major version I had to fix my website.
Rob, I've got a challenge for you. Show me a project that's doing this.
Doing what?
Converting from C to Rust.
Oh, well, I know that apparently curl thinks it's too big of a task, but other programs can do it. So, I mean, is it really that hard to port to Rust from C? I mean, C++ in this case, really. But, even Fish goes Rust. For those unfamiliar with the Fish shell, it's a terminal shell like Bash or ZSH, yet with what some might call a more user-friendly interface. I mean, it's going to be different if you're used to Bash, but it's kind of designed to be friendly out of the box with handy features such as auto suggestions, more obvious error messaging, syntax highlighting, interactive man pages for command options. There's even a web-based configuration that I didn't really realize, and really a lot more than that. Being so used to Bash myself, I've only played with Fish a little bit, very little. And I've never made it my shell or dug in too deep, but I think that's something I am going to do and demo on the show in one of these future episodes. But I have a different series in mind for the next few weeks, but I will bring the Fish shell to everybody and do a deep dive. But back on topic, this week, Fish 4.0 has been released, and the major change under the hood is the code base has been migrated from C+ to Rust. The whole thing. It's not just parts of it here and there. It's all just Rust now. This means the build process and dependencies are different from what they were before, but they say the end user experience should remain mostly unchanged, except being Rust, which means it's going to be better, right? For those familiar with Fish 4.0 brings some other new features, such as a new bind key notation. Random will now produce different values from the previous Fish version when using the same seed. Control C will now clear the command line by default. Fish can now be built as a self-installing binary. And for those who care about this, some WSL adjustments were made for Windows fans like our very own David, who joins us every once in a while, and a number of other updates. So why Rust? Other than the obvious reason, we've been discussing on the show almost every week lately. It's awesome. But the other reason is really, which is kind of like the System 76 guys, the devs just like it. Basically, the devs really weren't happy with C, and Rust knew that, or they knew that Rust. They knew Rust, and it did everything they needed to do. One of the other things I'm still starting to learn by going through these comments in Phoronix is, all these Rust comments and all these Rust stories is that Rust is way more of a polarizing topic than I really realized. Many love it, and that doesn't surprise me. But what surprises me is how many negative comments are about Rust in the comments section. Like my previous story, I said there were some negative comments on here. It's just the same kind of things that I don't know why people hate Rust. I mean, I've done a little bit of C years ago, just kind of dabbled. I looked at Rust and was like, nah, that doesn't look fun. So I don't know any more than that. But, I'd love to hear some actual feedback from others out there who hate Rust and why. Or, I mean, we all know why people love it. Those are the kind of people I'm used to hearing from. I'd like to know from these people on the internet why you hate it. No one really gave a good any good information about why they hate it. It was just very general hate for it. But
yeah. I can tell you some of that, right? So one of the reasons people dislike Rust is that for one thing, they're annoyed with every time there's a security any kind of problem in an application. You should have rewritten it in Rust. That gets annoying really fast because most of the time that's a dumb thing to say. The other one,
okay, yeah, but I mean that's nothing. Doesn't mean make anything wrong with Rust. That's more with the problem with the Rust fanboys.
Well, so this is a thing that people tend to conflate the fanboys of a project with the project itself. That happens a lot. And then you've also got, I think this is pretty much all of it. Like the few people that have criticisms of the Rust language itself that I've heard, and I have some of these because I've done a little programming in Rust. Certain things about it are very different from like the C paradigm. And that takes some time to get used to because it is a different way to program. But most people that I've talked to that have kind of gone through that, it's like after you stick with it for a few months and you get a little bit better, a little more used to it, people tend to start appreciating it, right? So it's usually not the language itself. Usually the problem is, the fanboys that make these annoying statements or the idea of being forced into using it. And nobody likes being forced into using something.
Yeah, but even that second segment, that second reason you say, people don't like the differences they're used to see. They don't like Rust. I mean, that's a reason to not want to program in it yourself, but that's no reason to hate that other people want to use it or that other things are in it. Why hate a program for being written in Rust just because you don't like to write in it?
Well, sometimes I think it's because people look at it like the new flavor of the week and, they're like, oh, it's going to be a flash in the pan or it's not going to stick around. It's, and I think there's just some natural, it's everybody's favorite thing to hate. And I think really it's one of those things where time is going to tell how it's going to age, give it another 10 years. And
yeah, absolutely.
If it's still the new hotness and still going running great, or has something else taken over and it's lost some of its luster?
I'm going to give you 2 words: change, inertia.
Yeah, that's part of it. So everything has been written in C. All the important stuff has been written in C for so long. Don't at me. I know what I said. All the important stuff has been written in C for so long. You come along with a new systems language. You say, this is the one to use. Well, of course, people aren't going to appreciate that.
Yeah.
But even Rust itself has admitted that you can't fully replace C with Rust. There's some of the low-level stuff that Rust cannot do.
I think with the unsafe keyword, you can do all of that. Most all of that stuff in Rust these days.
They have fixed it?
Yes.
Okay.
To be able to put it into the kernel, actually. The Rust language evolved a lot to be able to get it into the kernel. To that point, there is actually the is it Redux? The Rust kernel that is intending to potentially be an alternative to Linux. I was almost said replace Linux. That's not quite accurate. It's an alternative.
Maybe. Not yet.
I mean, who knows? In 30 years, maybe. But so yeah, they've actually added all that stuff, and it's all gated behind the unsafe keyword. Because they know, like, you're dealing directly with memory addresses. Of course it's unsafe. But at the same time, that's what you've got to do to talk to real hardware.
To add on to that thought, if you're not, if you don't like it, you don't want to program it, don't program it. I guess one scenario is if you are an actual contributor and something you contribute to is moving to Rust, I can understand people not liking that. But it's kind of like the whole Rust in the Linux kernel argument is, as a user, like Linus says, as a user, you have no real reason to hate it or love it as long as it works for you. If you're a contributor and it's messing up your workflow, okay.
Like I said, changes.
I think there's probably another argument to be made here that Rust programs are sort of a pain to package because of the way cargo works.
I do kind of dislike that, actually. when I've installed Rust packages, I could see that.
But that's not just a Rust problem. There are a lot of other languages that have that same problem. So,
I mean, hopefully that gets more streamlined to install like everything else. But maybe that's a wishful thinking.
We could easily get off on a tangent about how some packages or package managers can introduce security risks.
Yeah. Yep. All right, Ken, that felt like you were trying for a segue, but your next story is about Cosmic Desktop, so I'm not sure what exactly the segue was. But let's talk about Cosmic, though. I think it's time.
I'll be more than happy to, especially since this one's from Bobby Borisov. He reported on System 76 officially unveiling Cosmic Alpha 6. Hard to believe we're that far into it. When Bobby described one of the latest additions, Desktop Zoom, I learned about some handy shortcuts that KDE also uses for the same feature. The super and the equal sign to zoom in, and super and the minus or dash to zoom out. Now that's the one with the underscore on it also, so you don't try the other minus sign. He also mentioned another shortcut that you can use with the super and the mouse scroll for scrolling in and out. There's also another new feature that's introduced by Cosmic Alpha 6. It's a desktop view. You can access the desktop view feature by right-clicking on an empty desktop area and then choosing Desktop View Options. Now you have toggles to hide or display desktop folders, drives, and even the trash icon. You can even customize icon sizing and grid spacing. Then there's Workspaces, which receives some updates to include scrolling between workspaces in the overview as a quick and easy way for navigating to your intended destination. You can also toggle on floating windows gravitate to nearby edges in window management settings, which will automatically align the window's edge to the adjacent screen border when dragged close to it, removing the struggle of aligning it with the edge manually. I'm surprised KDE doesn't have that feature. For power users relying heavily on the Cosmic Launcher, a scroll feature now appears to view additional matches if a search yields more than 8 results. Furthermore, selecting power off, restart, or log out in the launcher triggers a neat countdown timer, mirroring the behavior found in the Power Applet. I recommend reading Bobby's article to find out about the upgrades to file management and Cosmic Media, as well as what Bobby didn't like. Otherwise, I could be here the rest of the show.
Hold on, Ken. You totally missed the whole theme of the show here, and you forget to even bring it up. Cosmic is built on Rust. How that not even?
I mean, so in fairness, this is sort
We've
of
had enough Rust.
This is one of those stories where you shouldn't have to care. You shouldn't have to care whether it's written in Rust or not. You shouldn't have to care what language it's written in.
You shouldn't have to care anytime unless you're a contributor.
You shouldn't have to care.
We got ferrous oxide all over.
Yeah.
I hope not.
When do you guys think that Cosmic is actually going to go for a stable release?
Alpha 6.
It's going to be 26.
Hopefully they hit beta by the end of this year.
I think it'll be stable the first quarter of 26.
I think at our New Year's thing, I said it would come out this year, but it seems to be going slower than I hoped. I mean, it felt like it was so close to being there last summer to me. So when I tested it,
well, I didn't realize they were up to Alpha 6 when I was reading this article. And here it's only March now.
Yeah, I saw on X that the CEO Carl, I believe that's his name, made a statement that he's like, we're not gonna predict any more release dates. We got those wrong. We're just gonna release it when it's done. So we will see.
And I think that's the way to do it. That way you're not trying to hit some arbitrary date and put out something that's substandard.
Yes, it's
done when it's done.
Yep,
kind of like good barbecue.
And he'll be on again after it's done on Floss Weekly.
You know, as far along as it was last summer, I haven't tried it since then, and they've gone through 5 other alphas since then, or they're on the 5th since then, because I think that was the first alpha, maybe it was the second. I don't remember. But I don't know. I'm surprised there's still alpha and not, beta.
The beta, yeah.
It's arbitrary, really.
It is sort of, and a lot of it comes down to like how many bugs and what kind of bugs they find, how much stuff is missing still that they suddenly discovered that, that has to be there before we can do a release. So there's a lot that goes into it.
There.
All right. Speaking of releases, we got some news about some video cards. I don't think we've talked much since the announcements about these. Jeff, what is the new Radeon cards, and what's the news that you've got on them?
Well, if you're into graphics cards and gaming, you've likely heard that AMD has officially announced the Radeon RX 9070 and the 97 XT offerings. While they were initially set to be announced at CES in January, the announcement was postponed, allowing the graphics cards a bit more time before the official release. This current release is purely informational as of yesterday, the 28th of February. The actual numbers from reviewers are expected next week. Basically, next Thursday is when they go for sale, and the third-party reviews can go out. Mm-hmm. Michael Larrable at Phoronix was at the launch announcement, and during the announcement, he inquired about ROCm support for RDNA 4 GPUs at the launch. RDNA 4 GPUs being the 9070 and the 9070 XT. For those unfamiliar too, ROCm is AMD's competitor to NVIDIA's CUDA. Both ROCm and CUDA are part of the compute stack for their respective GPUs. It's used for AI, Blender renders, fluid simulations, similar computational tasks. It's not something you run into for gaming, or if you do, it's very niche and rare. These are for scientific type workloads. The significance of this is that NVIDIA's CUDA currently dominates scientific and compute workloads. And CUDA is proprietary and exclusive to NVIDIA GPUs, where ROCm is an open compute stack. AMD has been investing significant effort into ROCm, aiming to compete not just in gaming, but also the compute domain. You can read in AI as well, since that's also a very lucrative market at the moment. ROCm is designed with the aid of tools and some small tweaking to be compatible with CUDA. So The idea being that developers can take their existing CUDA code and easily transfer it to ROCm so that then they can purchase AMD cards. AMD has confirmed that ROCm support is coming, but it just won't be available on launch day. Now, they have been actively engaging, this is AMD, has been actively engaging with developer communities to ensure ROCm's efficiency on the hardware side, ease of use for developers. They want to make it a very smooth and capable tool set. Michael did mention he didn't get a solid date for this, and despite follow-up attempts via email, has yet to receive a response. So Michael, said that he'd be okay if it was a short delay for some quality assurance. It wouldn't be too bothersome, but if it's an extended day, such as months, he thought it'd be very frustrating if it took that long to get things rolling. Now, if you're new to the compute side of the GPUs market, AMD's 7900 series cards, along with Radeon 7 cards, currently support ROCm. So they do have support today for ROCm. Other AMD cards might work or have unofficial support. They're kind of in that, give it a shot. It may or may work, may or may not work. But they really put their force behind the powerful cards because it's to handle large compute tasks that, you're going to use ROCm or CUDA when you've got a lot of heavy compute, and lower end cards just don't have the benefit to put a lot of resources in to try to support them. A lot of times if you're running a lot of heavy ROCm or CUDA, you need more memory. You need, you're doing really heavy compute workloads. You don't want to use just the very low end card because it's not going to gain you much benefit and probably doesn't have the hardware or memory to support what you need to get done. Check out the article in the show notes for more details. It includes several links to supporting articles on ROCm compatibilities matrix, AMD's unified AI, which deals with that as well. And there's also NVIDIA benchmarks linked in the article with compute and CUDA results. So there's a lot more background information on these compute results if you so desire in the article in the show notes. Mm-hmm. Personally, I hope AMD excels with ROCm, as NVIDIA needs competition in the compute side right now of GPUs. NVIDIA is basically owning it right now. Mm-hmm. And I'll be honest, that's the major reason I have an NVIDIA card in my computer right now. I would love to have Team Red as an option in the future. So come on, AMD, you got this. You can do it.
Yeah, I think it's worth saying though that we're quickly approaching the point to where regular people are using CUDA and ROCm for doing stuff, whether it's generating pictures, being able to run something like the DeepSeek LLM locally, using it inside Blender to accelerate that. There is beginning to be some real use cases for these outside of your huge non-industrial, but your big computer data center stuff.
Right.
I mean, they're not big computer data center, but I'm not sure if I'd call them regular people yet.
Well, so you're doing it more on a smaller scale. If you're just playing around with Blender, doing some stuff mm-hmm. like that, they're focusing right now on the high-end cards because mm-hmm. they're trying to capture those really prosumer, semi-professional people that really have to get some of this data crunched in a expedited amount of time.
Okay. So that's an interesting thought. So like AMD with ROCm, they have their officially supported cards, and you're right, those are all the pro cards. Those are your workstation and pro cards. But they've got code written in there to support a bunch of consumer cards too. My card that runs in my desktop, definitely not a pro card, definitely not a workstation card, because that is cheap. It works with ROCm, and I get to do, some image generation with that. I can throw in a prompt and say, hey, I want to see, the other day I was like, give me a picture, make me a picture of the 4 hosts of the Untitled Linux Show. And of course, it looked nothing like us because the model I was using had no idea what we looked like. But just the fact that you can do that on your own machine and not have to use one of the online services, that's pretty cool. All right, so there is beginning to be more and more use case for that, and I think you'll see here soon. You'll see people doing more things with like let's run LLMs in a video game so that we have unique dialogue. And we have, the characters look different every time you play, and I think things like that are coming. I think it's inevitable that companies are going to start taking advantage of that and trying to do those cool things.
You just need them to open source the software so that you can do it yourself.
That would be nice.
It is open source.
A lot of it is.
HIP and RockM is a lot of it is open source.
No, I mean the game
the thing
software.
to keep in mind is it's the big thing to keep in mind right now is they're focusing on the higher end cards, but once that really gets rolling, it will then trickle down to the lower end cards. It's just they've got to establish the foothold in the professional level first, fight CUDA, and then the support will extend. So, back to Ken's segue.
You've also got the professional level cards. Those are the ones that need it to say, because you're doing it in commercial. Those are the ones that need it to say it's officially supported. Those of us that are playing around with it, we don't care if it's officially supported. We care whether it works or not. But if you're in some big corporation, you've got to have that stamp of approval that says, yes, this is officially supported. You can get support for it and blah, 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 all of that.
Well, and sometimes official support means that, okay, every single instruction is supported, but that could be it's got to include that weird instruction that's maybe only used in fluid dynamics or something like that, where 90% of it works, which handles 99% of your use case. But because it's not that corner case doesn't work, they can't say officially. But, you and I would never notice it because it just works for what we do.
Yep. All right. Rob is chomping at the bit. I can't tell if he wants to make a comment on this story or if he wants to go to his story. Either way,
I'm going to start with a comment in that I can confirm that Copilot, on the web, has no idea what we look like either. It is something else.
I'm sure.
Do I look better?
Well, we all look a lot younger. It's a diverse community. Two of us appear to be female. So yeah.
Wow.
I guess I should have gave a little more of my prompt, but it has no idea who we are. What's wrong with you? Come on, Microsoft. Anyway, on to other topics that may involve GPUs and gaming and things like that. Okay, this isn't exactly a Linux story either. Yet. It's not a Linux story yet, but it is open source. So I'm hoping someday it turns into a Linux story. One of my favorite games from my younger days, I wasn't a child anymore, but I was younger, much younger than I am today.
How much younger?
Late 90s. So I'm not doing math. This is not the Untitled Math Show. One of my favorite games, my favorite games was Command and Conquer. CNC, which it's often abbreviated as, was a real-time strategy game where you build up your base, your army, and you'd go after the enemy through different stages. It's kind of hard to really explain. In some ways, it's kind of like Civilization, but not turn-based.
It's a real-time strategy game.
It's a real-time strategy game, or Factorio without the automation. But it's maybe not the first, but definitely one of the earliest real-time strategy games. At least one of the good early ones. Anyway, I love these games, and this week Electronic Arts has open sourced several of these games, including Command & Conquer Red Alert, Tiberian Dawn, Renegade, and Generals. And I'm pretty sure I played all of these. I did have like a pack of them at one time that had about everyone in there. So these have been licensed under the GPL, which I don't know if they have any extra restrictions, but it's the GPL. So please, somebody make this a fork or whatever you got to do to free Civ or whatever you got to do so that way I could play this on Linux. it might be playable on Steam because they did add some stuff to Steam, I guess, last year. And I didn't know about that. But also, if you're going to make this, a native Linux game or whatever, consider that this game dates back to 1996. So that's 28 years ago. What year is it now? 25? 29 years ago. and so it does include some older dependencies such as DirectX 5, which Microsoft did recently open source a lot of the DirectX. I don't know what versions, or I don't know, maybe you could take that too and just slap this all together. But I'm still hoping maybe someone can modernize these games, make them available on Linux. It'd be pretty awesome. Additionally, as I was saying, CNC was remastered and brought to Steam last year. So I read, I have not checked that out yet. And now EA, Electronic Arts, has enabled Steam Workshop support for more Command & Conquer titles. And I didn't know what that meant, so I had to look into it. And basically it means that users will be able to do things such as upload their own custom maps. And EA has also updated all their mission editors and world builder tools so you can publish maps directly to Steam Workshop. And to top this off, to support the Steam Workshop, they're releasing a CNC modding support pack, which contains the source XML, schema, script, shaders, map files for all the games that use the Sage engine. So there's a lot of things available for what I think. If I haven't played it in quite a few years, but I have played it from time to time over the decades. I've come back to it. They are great games. I love them. If you haven't played them, well, I don't know if you'll love them too, but you should. So I think it's time for me to flash back to my more youthful days and indulge in some classic Command & Conquer.
Yeah, I have fun memories of the Command & Conquer games.
Yeah.
I like that Rob's our expert and is not really sure what year it is. That tells you what kind of expert he is, right there.
I mean, if you're talking about retro gaming, that's sort of a requirement. What year is it now?
Yeah.
I'm a little sad that the old Command & Conquer game that I played the most of is Tiberian Sun, and it is not part of the release.
No, Tiberian Dawn is. I mean, it's close.
Yes.
I almost feel like they keep making more. I mean, they seem to be making progress towards this. Maybe they'll all be coming out eventually. I don't know.
Hopefully,
maybe not.
And it's hard to say. It's hard to say why. Like, so did Westwood hire some other developer to write part of this, and the contract didn't specify that Westwood would take ownership of all the code? But like, there's all sorts of things that can happen inside of a proprietary code base that make it real difficult to release the source.
They all have very similar gameplays. Being open source, somebody could make some maps that are similar to these other ones and kind of make it for you. Possibly.
Now,
and that's where you get
if
AI
I
to make
remember
it
correctly, with it being released in 96, wasn't it being using the Microsoft DirectX 5 SDK?
Yep, that's what I said.
Yep.
I didn't say the word SDK, but DirectX 5.
I will admit to something right here, being kind of one of the gamer people on the panel.
You haven't played it.
I've never played it.
They're fun games. They are. Now, I will say that real-time strategy is probably not everyone's cup of tea, but they are fun. They're fun games.
They are some of my favorite games of all time.
They can be fun, but if it's a real-time strategy MMO that runs 24/7, it can be devastating too.
They made some of those, but this is not that.
You could play multiplayer. I mean, it wasn't 24/7 like that either, but
no. But there was multiplayer mode for it. Yeah.
Well, I'm just thinking of one that I got addicted to about 10 years ago.
World of Warcraft,
EverQuest,
Magic Rush Heroes.
Never heard of it.
It's an Android, but I played it on Android devices.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't play games on my phone.
Lucky you, man. I've had to just shut it down. I have a card game on the phone. I have a different card game on the tablet, and that's it. That's my only gaming on the phone, because otherwise it just does not work well.
Oh, it frustrates me. It's too small of a screen. I don't have keyboard and mouse, and I'm like,
true.
Torques me off.
All right. You could. There's Bluetooth. You could have a keyboard.
So let's move on to the motion control subsystem. Ken, what in the world is a motion control subsystem? What do we want this for?
Well, it's actually a Linux motion control subsystem, and Laravel wrote about a set of patches proposing the introduction of a Linux motion control, or LMC, subsystem that was posted to the Linux kernel mailing list this week for drivers that could control devices like CNC machines and 3D printers. There's what we could want it for. Now, David Jander sent out the request for comments patch series for adding the LMC subsystem to the kernel. In it, David explains, this subsystem defines a new UAIP, I'm assuming that's user AIP, but I could be wrong, for motion devices on the user space side, as well as a common functionality for hardware device drivers on the driver side. The request for comments also mentions that Linux motion control may affect other projects, such as Linux-CNC and Clipper, for example. Now, David also mentions the code is already in use controlling machines with up to 16 stepper motors and up to 4 DC motors simultaneously. Michael notes that the Linux motion control subsystem infrastructure and 2 example motion drivers currently use a combined 4,000 lines of C code. Now, I repeat again, C code. Since I've only touched on what Michael wrote, I recommend following the link in the show notes for his full article.
This is interesting. So you could make a 3D printer that actually runs Linux.
Or you could have Linux running several 3D printers.
Or several, yeah. Cool. This is definitely interesting. I imagine this sort of thing would even be useful for the folks that do like Linux inside of vehicles, right? A lot of the self-driving cars and cars with even driver assistance run Linux inside of them. All kinds of fun stuff in this.
And I'm gonna, and if you throw in some code that would allow the system to act intelligently, it could maybe drive itself on that vehicle.
That's the idea.
Well, and they talk about the real-time kernel, and so there'd be a lot of devices that could tie in with both industrial, medical, safety.
So you probably what is happening in a lot of cases is where someone goes to design something like this, they've got a Linux brain, and then they've got little microcontrollers that are connected over UART or SPI or I2C, some one of those kind of serial formats, and where the Linux controller says, "Hey, here's what I want you to do," and then the microcontroller is running some kind of tiny real-time operating system, and it can do those controls in exactly the right time. And so now they're saying, if you're using true preemption the real-time kernel, you can just do all that directly and not have to have that extra microcontroller. So that's going to make a lot of sense for especially like smaller, simpler devices, because you can do them a whole lot cheaper. You don't have to have the extra microcontrollers in there. So cool stuff. Real neat. I like it. Okay, what's next? Jeff has the last story for the day until we get into our command line tips. And
You were kind of segueing into this before, Jonathan.
Yes. So what might the rest of us want to do with machine learning and artificial intelligence on our personal Linux machines?
Yeah, so I have 2 articles for this next story, and the first one focuses on machine learning and Linux software applications. Over at Linux Links, they have a series of articles based on machine learning and deep learning. It is important to clarify that machine learning and deep learning are not the same thing. Machine learning involves using algorithms to parse data, learn insights from that data and make determinations or predictions. This process involves training the machine with large amounts of data. Deep learning, on the other hand, is a subset of machine learning that uses multi-layered artificial neural networks. This approach delivers state-of-the-art accuracy in tasks such as object detection, speech recognition, language translation, and more. Now, the reason I mention this is that the first article lists several groups of programs, and the different groups, such as the first being audio processing options. These programs can perform various functions, from separating instruments and vocals to speech recognition. There's also chat options that allow you to communicate with a machine. Additionally, they have graphics programs, which are capable of various types of manipulation and image generation. And finally, there's a group of science programs to help with research and complex problem solving. I should mention that none of the programs require being online, and they all can be run self-hosted. So if you're worried about your data, or, depending on what you want to feed in the machine, none of these need to transfer any of your data out of your machine. So it's all controlled by you. Now, to kind of see how it all works, the second article in the show note delves into one specific example from the many options listed in the first article. So it looks at a web interface for chatting called Surge, Surge. Now, I'm not going to go into real big detail here, but the article guides you through how the installation process works, providing example installations using Manjaro, which is an Arch-based distribution, and of course, Ubuntu 24.10. It walks you through, and you'll see the different, it'll hold your hand through it. And you can also then, once you have it installed, see the different models available. So Surge is kind of the framework, and then you load the models in to get more specific on how, what exactly you want it to do. And the models also vary in size and depend on how much RAM your system has. And, you can basically pick and choose the model that best suits your needs and best suits your hardware. Now, once the model is installed, the article provides an example of input and output of the program, so you can kind of see how you would use it. And, I know many people are getting tired of hearing about AI, but for those that aren't, this offers a fun way to explore it. You run it solely on your hardware, and, in this example, Surge is written in Python. This allows you to examine the code and understand how it operates if you so desire. If you really want to get in there and look under the hood, you can. Take a look at both articles linked in the show notes if you're interested in experimenting with AI and prefer running it locally without connecting online. And these articles, both of them, provide several options for you to explore to do that very thing.
I particularly need to check out Whisper. I use an online service for doing video transcriptions, and I have for a while now thought that Whisper might be the way to do it. Could save that $5 a month out of my budget that I'm paying for it. It's kind of terrible though to have an open source show and use a closed source online service to do the transcription. So,
and now we know.
Now you know.
Well, I will forgive that once we get all the hosts off of closed proprietary operating systems.
Yeah, we still give Randall grief about that every once in a while because he's on Mac. It's all right.
When you pay that much, you're going to use it.
Yeah, I guess. All right. Well, that's our news. Let's get into some command line tips, and we're going to let Rob go first with more utils. So I'm assuming this is a take on core utils, and it's what the programs that core utils doesn't include that it really should.
Yeah. So it's not a take, but it is what they call an extension of core utils. So it's additional programs to supplement that. I don't know, maybe somebody thought that they should be in core utils, but it's more utilities. And I'm going to go through a series over the next few weeks, going through some of these. I noticed at least one of these Ken already went through, and the one he went through is a TS, and that's apparently one of the more utils. So I was going to start with that one and went back to the notes and saw, well, I guess Ken did TS. So I should have looked at what episode that was so I could say, go back to that episode for it. But I did not keep that to memory. Instead, I'm going to start with Chronic. So Chronic, that's CRONIC. And what that does is it runs a program in the background, completely silent in the background, unless there is an error. So for those watching, I'm just going to use some simple programs for examples, but there's probably a lot more complex. So as an example, let's just say I run ls. Oh, let me put ls on the right screen. All right. I'm going to run ls, and it's going to show me what's in there. Now, if I do ls/nothing, because there's no folder, it's going to say nothing. So now if I do this in Chronic, I do Chronic and run ls. Well, it ran it. It's silent. You don't see it. Now, if I do that with a folder that doesn't exist, it's going to spit out just the error, telling me that nothing exists. Another example, let's just say if I do Chronic ping 1.1.1.1, and I don't want that to go forever, so I'm going to do a C2. So it's going to do ping 1.1.1.1 2 times only. It's gone 1, 2, and then it returns, and there was no error there. Well, let's just say I forget to fill out, and I just do Chronic ping. Well, it's going to give me an error code because I didn't even complete the code, the command line. So Chronic is a tool if you want to run things silent in the background. That's really what it's for, but you'll still get to see the error outputs. Most cases, you probably don't want them to also be invisible to you because you want to know if something doesn't go right. So that's Chronic, the first one in the series of more utils.
Cool. I like it. All right,
Ken.
Oh,
I should add.
Yes.
I should also add. I'm not quite sure if this is version of more utils. I haven't gotten into it. When I first looked into it, it's in the SUSE or OpenSUSE, apparently in their more utils.
Mm-hmm.
But when I went to do this under my virtual machine where I like to do all my demos from, this is Ubuntu. And when I installed more utils, Chronic was not included. So I did have to do a separate apt install. And when I was looking at the versioning, I think Chronic got added a couple versions, a few versions ago. So I believe that's what that is.
It's also likely that when you go to compile it, you can specify which of the actual commands you want to compile in. And so maybe not every packager includes every one of them. But
that could be it too.
Yeah. All right. Ken.
Yes. Today I am going to demonstrate another pipewire command. This one is pwloopback. It's used for creating loopback nodes from the command line via pwloopback. It uses the pipewire loopback module to create loopback devices configured to automatically connect to speakers, microphones, or applications, and even swap stereo channels via the command line options. Let me go ahead and bring up my command line here, as well as my Qt pipewire graph, so you can see it happen graphically. But as with the others, you can use -H to get the help options that you're seeing on the screen. For those of you listening, that would give you the options such as -H or --help for showing the help, --version to show the version, -R or --remote for if you needed to name a remote daemon, -n or --name for your node name. I'll demonstrate that one in a bit. There's also -g or -group for naming a default node group or node group, and with the default in my case being PW-loopback-768-195. That tells you nothing, doesn't it? But some of the others are for giving you the number of channels, channel map. That's handy if you want to swap your left and right channels of your input so that they come out on the right and left channels of your output, or like to a speaker. Then you can also use -L or -- latency to set your desired latency in milliseconds. Another one that I'm going to demonstrate is -D or -- delay. For setting the desired delay, you can use floating instead of just a straight integer. That's going to be in seconds, by the way. And you can use -C or -C or -- capture to capture your source that you want to connect to. You'd name it, or you can give us the serial. Then you can do a -- capture props, where you can capture string properties. -- P or -- playback, which allows you to identify the playback sync to connect to. That one I'm going to demonstrate also. And then there's the -- playback - props, where you can identify the playback string properties you want to use. For those of y'all listening, I do have my command line up, and it shows where I use the -- version to show that I am running PW loopback with it compiled with libpipewire 1.2.4 still. No update yet for me, though I hear there's an update coming to Pipewire. Now, the basic Pipewire command, PW - loopback, when you run it, well, set it up. For those of y'all listening, the QTP graph shows where the loopback hooked up between my mic and my headset. So I'm hearing myself talk, and you can see how that is affecting my speech. I'm doing a -C to cancel out of that. And now to demonstrate how I can name it by using the -N, followed with test - loopback in single quotes. And then I'll use the -D followed by a 2 for 2-second delay with -- followed by Google Chrome input. And when I enter that, and it automatically sets up the loopback. It automatically sets up the loopback. And y'all are hearing the basically it's change the rate of the echo. I can change the rate of the echo, or I was playing with it earlier up to 10 seconds. I was playing with it earlier up to 10 seconds, and that was really confusing myself 10 seconds later. I'm going to stop torching y'all now, but that's a demonstration of using PW loopback. Jonathan, have you got any thoughts on where you could use this?
There is another use case for PW loopback, and that is when you need to be able to take edited audio and use it as an input device, or when you want to take all of your output and run it through another filter and then run it out. So it's useful in getting applications to see your Pipewire items as being like equivalent to real hardware. I used for the longest time a PW loopback on this machine when we did the previous recording solution for this show, actually, and so that I could mix everybody together and then give the output. And then I believe I also have a PW loopback on the machine behind me to be able to do a compressor on my live audio when listening to things, because I got so tired of YouTube videos where the audio was just all over the place. So I put a compressor on my speakers.
I've also got some links in the show notes to some other use cases. One gives some other examples. And then there's one from, I thought I didn't on how to do static loopbacks.
Yeah, you can set them up in your config file so that it'll be there when you're ready to go. Yeah, cool. Neat stuff.
And I was thinking next time you could start the PW loopback at the beginning of the show and just have the loopback as going into the show instead of your regular voice, and then put like an hour and a half delay.
All right, Jeff, what is wall?
My command line tip this week is wall, which is actually pretty simple command. It's used to message all users. So this command displays a message or the contents of a file on the terminals of all currently logged in users. If the lines are shorter than 79 characters, they'll be white space padded to have 79 characters. And if they're longer than 79 characters, they'll be wrapped. A carriage return and new line are added at the end of each line in the wall command always. So for options, there's of course the -H, which is help, and -V, which is version, both of which are very common in pretty much all command line tips we have, at least the true command line, tips. Wall also, though, has the -N command, which means it will display your message without the default header. And there's the -T, which will abandon the write attempt to a terminal after a certain timeout. If you need to display the contents of a text file to the users of a system, you can do that as well by typing wall space and then path to your text file. So basically, this comes in if you've ever been on a terminal and suddenly seen a message come up, normally, system is going down for reboot or system maintenance at X amount of time. It was probably generated with wall if you were in an actual terminal. So you can take a look at the article in the show notes for more details, but it's basically for messaging users on your system.
All right. When I first saw wall, I was thinking of the GCC flag, the -W all that gives you all of the warnings when you go to compile something. Like, no, that's very different.
Not quite there.
Not quite the same thing. Okay.
Yeah.
I've got one as well, and I don't think we've covered this before. If we have, it was not in this much detail. One of my fellow Hackaday authors, Al Williams, I promise it's Al, it's not AI. This is not AI Williams. He is a real person. Al Williams, he does the Linux Foo column over there, which has some great stuff in it. And this one was USB over IP. And the idea is I've got a computer here and I've got a computer there. And I have a USB thingy over there that I want to be able to access here. It's like, how do you make this work? And there is actually a way to do it. You can reroute USB connections over IP, and the Linux kernel has all of the stuff to be able to let you do that. And he's got a really comprehensive guide on how to do it. And he suggests using like a Raspberry Pi. And so you can have... let's see what would be a good example. Maybe you have a printer that's USB only and you want to be able to use it remotely. You can just throw a Raspberry Pi down there, plug it in over USB, get the USB IP, that's actually the name of the program, USB IP stuff up and working, and then you can print across your network to your USB only printer. There's some really cool stuff you can do with this, and I thought it was a great write-up, so wanted to feature it. So follow the link and do the things. It's a little bit more in-depth than some of our command line tips, but it's all there for you.
So no need to purchase those clunky little print servers for a non-network based printer. You just get a Raspberry Pi or something and voila.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, no, it's really neat. I didn't
realize he had recently done one using the PW loop.
Yeah, he's got all kinds of stuff. I think there's a link there. There at the bottom of the article, it's read more from this series, Linux Foo. And there's even a link there to see all articles in the series. And he's got quite a few of them, and they're all good.
Webcams. If you had some weird reason to do mice or keyboards. That sounds fun.
Yep.
I like it.
Yep, it's cool. It's cool.
Basically, the one I just added to the show notes shows him creating a loop back to link radio to trying to look to see to a speaker.
Oh, I can see that. Yeah. The audio network pipes. Yeah, cool stuff. So go and follow the link and read through all of those if you want all of those good Linux tips and hacks and stuff. All right, I think that's pretty much the show. I want to let each of the guys get the last word in if they want to on something. We're going to start with Rob. I bet he's going to plug his website and all of the places where you can follow him and give him coffee.
Well, since you already got that done for me, I'll just point. So, like I always say every week, because I got nothing better to say. No fun poems or anything. Come find me, connect with me. Website's robertpcampbell.com. From there, LinkedIn, Twitter, Blue Sky, Mastodon, and a place to donate coffees in the form of $5 increments to me right here. Nothing else to say.
It's a miracle. It's the first time all day. Ken destroyed his computer's audio subsystem by playing around with Pipewire too much.
Yes, I did. But all I'm going to say is back up.
There you go.
Back up.
Beep, beep, beep.
And Jeff.
Not much to say this week, so it's going to be Poetry Corner. Computer program, why are you running so slow? Time for a reboot. Have a great week, everybody.
So true. It's so true. All right.
That's what the weekends are for.
Yeah.
Rebooting.
Yeah. All right. Thank you guys each for being here. If folks want to follow me, there is, of course, a Hack-A-Day, and that's where Floss Weekly and my security column go live. And then don't forget to scan the QR code and look into Club TWiT. It's about the price of a cup of coffee per month. That's how you can show your support, get the ad-free versions of all the shows, and come join the Discord, too. It's a lot of fun. Other than that, we appreciate everybody being here, those that get us live and on the download. And, hey, we will see you next week on the Untitled Linux Show.
Hey, buddy, are you a geek? Are you a tech enthusiast? Then I would love to invite you to join a tech community like no other. You can gain exclusive access to our incomparable quality tech content for just $7 a month with Club TWiT. As a member, you'll enjoy all TWiT TV shows ad-free, plus access private video feeds for insider shows like iOS Today, Home Theater Geeks, and so much more. Dive into the members-only TWiT Plus bonus feed for behind-the-scenes content, club discussions, and special events. But here's the best perk. Join our incredible Discord community to watch live show productions, chat with hosts, and participate in exclusive members-only activities. It's your backstage pass to the world of TWiT. Whether you're a tech enthusiast or a lifelong learner, Club TWiT elevates your knowledge while entertaining your interests. Get 2 weeks free when you sign up now for $7 a month and unlock unparalleled access at twit.tv/clubtwit. That's twit.tv/clubtwit. And from the bottom of my heart, thank you and welcome to the club.